Today is Monday, January 27, 2009, and my name is Alejandra Mendoza, and I'm with Tom Edmondson to have a conversation about treatment practices in photograph conservation. This is part of a series of interviews I'm conducting to photograph conservators to investigate and describe the current state of treatment practices, the general characteristics and names of the interventions being performed, and the variables that influence the treatment performance. And also to talk about specific treatment procedures that have been performed over time, and finally to address the possible future directions of our field in this subject. I will follow a format for this interview in which I will begin asking you questions about your experience and then about the approaches and characteristics of the conservation treatments you perform. Then I will address some specific treatment topics and end up with your opinion about the future perspectives of the field.
Okay.
So, to begin, could you please tell me your name, your job title or affiliation?
Sure. My formal name is Thomas Edmondson. My friends and foes alike call me Tom. And I am a partner in Hugh Edmondson Conservation Services, which is a limited liability company in Kansas City, Missouri. And we specialize in a full range of treatment on works of art on paper and 19th and 20th century photographic materials.
And when was this lab established?
We established Hugh Edmondson Conservation in 1988, in the fall of 1988. And prior to that, I had been in private practice in Connecticut under the name of Thomas M. Edmondson, paper conservator, for just under 10 years, and I started that lab in 1978.
And Tom, could you describe to me what type of institutions or individuals comprise your clientele?
The majority of our clientele right now are private individuals, a few dealers, a few collectors, and a few institutions throughout the Midwest region.
And these institutions would be museums?
Museums, correct. Museums and historical societies.
And my next question would like to address the need for treatment. So how do you determine the treatment that you're going to conduct in the photograph?
Well, we are a private lab, and so it's very rare for anything to come into our studio that does not need some form of interventive treatment. So it's more like deciding how far a treatment needs to go rather than whether or not one needs to be done. And quite frankly, many of the pieces that come into our place usually have pretty severe damage, whether it's been through stupid human tricks or acts of God, tornadoes, rain, water pipes break, severe light damage, and a work of art or photograph is very badly discolored or torn up, and so it all just depends on the individual piece, and it's a case-by-case kind of thing. But it is the nature of our practice that if something's in our studio, it needs some kind of intervention.
And the treatments that you perform aim to both gain like structural stability and also aesthetic?
No, I mean, all of our treatments are aimed at chemical and physical stabilization, as well as retrieval of any lost aesthetic properties that the piece might have sustained.
And the pieces that come from institutions, do they also ask you for this type of treatment?
Yes, they do. Many times, most of our institutional clients, if they're coming to us, it's because something has happened accidentally to a piece. It's become damaged somehow through some kind of accident in handling or in transit. And so rarely does an institution, most institutional collections are in fairly good condition, and but a lot of their conditions on their works on paper are usually driven by exhibition needs, and so we do get pieces from an institution where there's again severe light damage, on older prints and that kind of thing.
Could you describe to me the scope of treatments you perform and the type of photographs you treat most frequently?
Most of my work until fairly recently has been on 19th and early 20th century photographs, ranging from daguerreotypes to up through albumin prints, silver gelatin prints, and then in the last few years I have actually had to deal with I guess what you would consider as contemporary photographs, meaning late 20th century chromogenic prints.
And do you treat other case objects as well?
I do some treatment on tintypes and ambrotypes as well. Usually your options are pretty limited there because of the nature of the materials. They're very sensitive to a lot of the materials that you would need to use on them. And it's generally dealing with repairing housings, emulsion consolidation on tintypes and ambrotypes, that kind of thing.
And negatives, are you asked to?
I do not get a whole lot of requests about negatives. A couple of years ago, I did a big survey on nitrate negatives in an institution down in Arkansas, and that was actually the first time in a long time that I'd been asked to deal with negatives as a material. And in all of the years that I've been in private practice, I've had one paper negative come into my studio, so it's not a major part of my practice.
And could you describe to me like the methodology you follow when you were asked to treat an object and the interaction you have with your clients?
Yeah, our normal procedure is to have the client, if possible, bring the piece to us. If that's possible, we usually give an initial pro bono consultation where we talk to the client about the piece, what the problems are, the general direction we feel that a treatment needs to go, and if it's at all possible, we'll give them some kind of a non-binding ballpark estimate so that they can decide whether or not they want to go any further than where they are. If the client decides to leave the piece with us, then we do a more formal examination. We test to make sure that we can do what we say we're going to do. And we write up a report, we do our preliminary photo documentation, and then we type that report up and we send it out in duplicate. And the client has to sign off on that report, and we charge for that examination time up front. Excuse me. And that's a separate charge, because sometimes the estimate turns out to be much higher than we anticipated, and the client may decide that he or she can't really justify spending, that kind of an expenditure on that particular item, but we still feel that we ought to get compensated for time. And then if they sign off, it goes into the queue of our studio, and then when it comes up, then we do the treatment. Right now we have about, depending upon the type of project, an 8-month to 14-month backlog of work in our studio right now.
And after you have done the treatment, how do you evaluate the results of your treatment?
Well, we're very thorough. We don't do partial treatments as a rule. We take treatments as far as we can safely take them for any given piece. If it involves stain reduction, we really try to make sure that there aren't any stains left with them. We do, when there's physical damage that needs to be repaired, we're very thorough in our in-painting and touch-up work that gets done, so that, which is part of the reason why we have such a backlog, because we tend to carry treatments further than a lot of conservators do. And because it's our name that's on the treatment. And so when we're done, we have to like the work that was done. And many times, quite frankly, the client doesn't really know how far it went because we carry it so far. But it's to our standards that we do it. And that's true whether it's a folk art piece, a family item, or a very high-end work of art. We put the same amount of effort and finessing into the treatment as for everything.
And I would like to ask you, in terms of degree or extent, how would you define a minor, a moderate, and a major treatment?
Minor treatments might just be repairing edge tears, getting out planar deformations because there's been, say, a watery vent that may not have left any staining, but has left a photograph or a work of art on paper distorted and cockled. An intermediate treatment might be more extensive edge tears, smudges, scrapes, that kind of thing. A major treatment is usually when there's been something catastrophic has happened, major complex tears, severe light damage, mold damage, severe foxing where all the stains and real foxing stains are throughout the design area or throughout the image area of the photograph, that to a degree to where it's very, very disfiguring and requires prolonged wet treatment and stain reduction, that kind of thing.
And all the work that you do in your studio may range in any of these categories?
Yes. So although the bulk of the work in our studio is usually medium to major treatment.
And do you consider the creation and application of secondary housing as treatment? Are you asked to do this?
We consider it part of the treatment a lot of the time. But there are times when a piece might require more intervention, but the cost of it might just be prohibitive. And so then we would get into housings, as a preventive measure. We just did that with a piece that received a lot of damage en route, a lot of superficial damage, but it was severe. And it probably should have come off of its mount, but it was an oversized photograph. It was going to be, probably a $4,000 or $5,000 treatment just to get it off of the mount. And so what we did was extensive in-painting and surface treatment, and then we oversaw the construction of a sink mat and to provide the physical support for it, and then it'll go back into a new frame.
I would like to ask you a little about the history or the changes that you have perceived in your practice. Have you perceived any changes in the level of intervention that you are asked to do or that you do?
Quite frankly, no. Again, it's the nature of our clientele. It usually means that the works that are coming into our studio, like I've said before, are usually pieces that require a lot of intervention. There are times when we might be asked by a museum that doesn't have a conservator to oversee, more preventive measures for their collection. But most of the time, our work remains pretty intensely major treatment oriented. I haven't seen that diminishing at all.
And have you perceived any change in the way people think of deteriorations? Like if they think they are inherent to photographs, like kind of patina or this idea? Do you think that some people perceive some deterioration as inherent to the history? Have you had conversations with your clients about this?
Actually, we oversee that kind of thing, and we design our treatments to to keep as much original material as is reasonable, and so. And our objective is when we're finished, is to have, a photograph look as good as it possibly can, but not look like we were there. And so, we strive to, to keep, obviously signatures, the presentation mounts on pieces and that kind of thing.
And for example, this silver mirroring.
Well, silver mirroring is probably an unnecessarily controversial subject. I know that there are people in the field of photograph conservation who feel that silver mirroring is just part of the history of the piece, when in reality it's the result of chemical and physical deterioration. And it's usually very disfiguring. And so we try to minimize it. We try to make it go away.
And in your observation, what is the influence of market into the treatments? Does it have an influence on the amount of treatment?
Not really, because we don't do a lot of work for dealers. Sometimes we get asked to do a treatment because an owner's decided that he or she wants to get rid of their photograph, and then it's more market driven in terms of whether or not to actually do the treatment at all, because sometimes the treatment can be risky, and so the owner has to decide if he or she wants to take that risk and run the risk of possibly having less than they already have. And because like we have one in right now that needs it's very badly foxed throughout the highlights, and that can be dealt with, but it's for this particular photograph, I think it's very risky. And I've informed the owner of that, and they're mulling it over.
They still haven't decided?
They have not decided. But we don't usually have market-driven things coming through. Some of our clients who deal in contemporary art, we have a little bit of that, and a lot of the times they won't have a lot of treatment done because they feel that it cuts too much into their profit margin.
Yes.
And so now I would like to start addressing these specific treatment topics, and I would start with daguerreotype cleaning. And well, the cleaning of daguerreotypes has been one of the earliest restoration treatments. As you know, it was performed since early times, and the materials and methodologies being used have changed considerably. So I would like to ask you, what's your opinion about this treatment and about the performance of this treatment?
Well, as you do know, in the mid-1980s, I was part of a team that involved a material scientist, and we developed a method for cleaning daguerreotypes called electrocleaning. and and I happen to be. I still believe that it's an effective and safe treatment. I do not believe that there has been any meaningful research done that proves otherwise. I know that there are many people who still struggle with that and who feel that it shouldn't be done. But I know of no science that's been done that has actually proven that it's an issue, that it really is an issue. Like any treatment, it does have its risks. If a daguerreotype plate has been so badly compromised by corrosion, by tarnish films, that the silver layer is destabilized, then you do run risk of damage through loss of silver. But that's not, it's not common. It's just a risk. I think like any treatment that's available for any kind of work of art or object, if it's done by people who don't fully understand how to do it, that it becomes even riskier. I feel that, in fact, I did do a search of my database, and I've had over 200 daguerreotypes since I established a database back in the 90s, and it's interesting because out of 217 daguerreotypes that have come through the studio, only 38 had electrocleaning as part of the treatment proposal, and of those 38, only 24 actually had electrocleaning done to them. So electrocleaning is not a frequently performed treatment, and I think that that's something that the field doesn't understand. That a great deal of very effective cleaning can be done using ammoniated deionized water washes, and the vast majority of the time, that's all that the daguerreotype plate really needs. And so, cleaning daguerreotypes, you have to decide what you mean by that. Sometimes cleaning a daguerreotype is simply taking an airbrush and dusting it off. But most of the time, it means some kind of a wash has been done, and that's usually it.
And of these times that you have pursued the chemical treatment with electrocleaning, how do you determine the needs of this treatment?
Well, it's purely subjective, and each plate cleans differently. And so the best way I can describe it is that part of the treatment is done when I've worked the process to a point to where there's no longer any additional change in the appearance of the daguerreotype plate. Then that plate has cleaned as much as it's going to. And sometimes it's very clean and fresh and looks like it just came out of the daguerreotypist development box, and sometimes there are still some stains left behind that you would like to have gotten rid of, but they're not going to go away within the parameters of the treatment as it's being applied, and you live with that. Because sometimes to try to get more, you might have to push the system, push the process into a range that could cause other problems, and it's usually not worth the risk.
And through these years that you pursued this treatment, have you been able to evaluate the results, like long term? Do you know?
I have seen, I have revisited treatments of daguerreotypes that I've done. I have been able to go back and look at a few plates where it's been 10 to 15 years after the treatment has been done, and the daguerreotype plate itself looks great, but the cover glasses were going again. And I think that was one of the things that came out of the research that was done back in the early 80s, which established the fact that that the whole structure of the daguerreotype package lends itself well to the deterioration of glass. And so I wasn't surprised to see that. But I did a project that's it's probably been close to 15 years now that I did that project, and it was it was a big collection, and I've not been notified of any changes if there have been any, and I would anticipate that at this point it's probably time to start looking at those cover glasses. I have not seen any of the plates that I have cleaned. I've not seen any recurrence of deterioration.
My next question is about the chemical treatments of photographs, and by this I mean the treatments that include the use of photographic chemistry to enhance, to restore the fading or the color shift of photograph, like bleach and redevelopment, for example. And these type of treatments have also been used since many years ago, and a significant amount of research has been done to see if these treatments are applicable to photographic materials. So I would like to know your opinion about these type of treatments. In which circumstances should they be performed, if you think that this is the case?
Yeah, well, to be honest with you, my attitude about it has actually changed over the years. For the longest time, I was pretty much against it. And then there were a couple of workshops that were done, and I realized in the course of those workshops that that the chemical treatments that we were investigating were all chemical treatments that had been used since the invention of the negative, and that most of those chemical treatments were intended to correct problems with degradation of negatives so that you could use them again. And so we began applying them to prints. And there are a few treatments that are so unpredictable that I don't consider using them. I have found in a few cases the use of the C. Fisher formula can be effective. I don't have a great deal of luck with it. Some people swear by it. The sodium borohydride treatment was developed, brought into practice by Jose Araca, and primarily for use with albumin prints, and occasionally a salted paper print, although I have never worked with a salted paper print. But I've had some luck with retrieval of really badly faded albumin prints that where there's just so little image left that, what's the point? I've had some luck with gelatin prints, gelatin silver prints. Not as much as with albumin, but actually a lot of the time I have my best results with albumin prints and even gelatin prints, even 20th century gelatin prints, doing light bleaching, using hydrogen peroxide in conjunction with light bleaching. And it doesn't take a lot, but it works. And as research that was presented in Denver last spring, in April at our annual conference, the AIC annual conference, the scientific research indicates that there isn't any bad chemistry that takes place, although in the laboratory the chemical model indicates that it would, but the whole process when it's carried through does not adversely affect the photograph, and the vast majority of the time improves the overall appearance through bringing up midtones and brightening highlights. And so the short answer is the judicious use of chemical treatments, I think, is quite acceptable, and it has to be determined by the degree of degradation of the image, and a thorough understanding on the part of the owner as to what's really going on. The concern that you're altering the image. I personally believe that the image is already altered, and so you're just altering it again. You're not probably putting it back to what it was, but you're putting it back to what it used to look like. And I really think that a lot of people just don't seem to understand that a deteriorated image is in an altered state. And if you don't understand that, then you probably shouldn't be working on them yourself anyway. And I don't mean that to be a belligerent statement. I just think that people really don't fully understand that a damaged or otherwise degraded image is altered. And so the argument about doing a chemical treatment, whatever that means, shouldn't be done because you're altering the image. It just doesn't seem very logical to me.
And the cases that you have done chemical treatments that involve bleaching or redevelopment of the types of things you just mentioned?
I don't do bleaching and redevelopment. I do know that can be done, but I also know that it can easily be a one-way street, and that sometimes, depending upon all kinds of factors that you have no way of knowing, you can bleach but not redevelop.
But when you have done this treatment you were saying in absorbent prints, where you could gain some image density or image color again, how was the reaction of your clients? Or what type of people were you?
Well, the client was always very happy because there's usually there's a refreshing of tonal properties, particularly with albumin prints. The main issue there is they've gone into the yellow-brown stage, and light bleaching is my most common treatment, and we find that we get rid of a lot of the yellow in the highlights, and the mid-tone and the higher density areas kind of leave the brown range and come back into a gray. the vast majority of the time, the overall contrast is improved, and so the images look much fresher and stronger, and are just a better read. And so the client is happy, and so am I.
I would like to address another topic, that is the unmounting and remounting of photographs, because this has been also been done in the past and it's been done in the present, and it has been considered necessary to promote the stability of the prints on one hand, and on the other hand also to promote or to allow the individual display of photographs if they belong to albums, for example. So there's like two ideas. In what circumstances do you think that unmounting a photograph is necessary?
I usually really, I get into a lot of philosophical discussion with a client who wants to disassemble an album. It doesn't happen very often. Usually, what happens when something comes in that's on an obvious album page is that somebody's already broken that volume up. And so you have one or two pages of photographs mounted back to back, and the rest of the album is who knows where. And so there I don't have an issue. Just to disassemble an album, usually that has to be done because the album's structure has failed. And it's usually going to be done in conjunction with a book conservator who's going to help rebuild the album as it was originally. And I think that that's fully justifiable. When the goal is to keep it as an album, but the original pages are too brittle and the binding is falling apart, then you have to do something. If the owner wants it as an album, and the owner could be a historical society, could be a collector, could be anybody, but if the decision has been made to maintain it as an album, then you disassemble and recreate pages and put it back together as an album. That's very expensive. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. Most of the time, though, the unmounting of photographs usually is because the mount itself has failed. It's broken, and therefore your photograph is at risk. It's become damaged in some other way, water stains, wood slap backing boards have left knock stains and dark lines down through the photograph and through the mount itself. Or it's very severely foxed, very badly light struck. If it's just a mount, a piece of cardstock with no names on it, nothing like that, but the aesthetic properties are totally compromised. I have no problem with taking that apart and cleaning up the photograph and just putting a new archival mount under the photograph. I've thought that through so many times, and I don't have an issue with that. That kind of nondescript mount is just that's what was available for the photographer to put the albumin print down, because otherwise albumin prints turn into cylinders. They roll up on themselves and they're not viewable as photographs. And so the idea is to get a mount back under it so this thing can be appreciated as an image. On presentation mounts, I don't know of any photographer who went around and looked at the mount board and said, I want this mount board because of the core material. That's really what's going to set this thing off, is that core material. that doesn't happen. And in the late 19th century, core materials on mount boards is pretty bad. And so when it's reached a point to where all of the other aesthetic properties have been compromised and or the photograph is at risk of catastrophic physical damage because of the extreme brittleness of its presentation mount, I have absolutely no problem taking that apart. And when that decision has been made and we know that it's a presentation mount, because that usually means that there's identifying information, then I take the photograph off the mount, I take the mount apart, keeping the front-facing sheets, anything that's got any printing or information on it, and sometimes it's on both facing sheets, the front and back. I take those two sheets off of the core, I throw the core away, and I put an archival core in, and I reassemble the mount, and then I put the photograph back on after I've done all of the other treatment to get rid of any stains and discoloration. And I know that there are people who are starting to raise the voice that, you know, well, we shouldn't be taking these mounts apart and that kind of thing. And quite frankly, those comments are coming from people who've never taken a mount apart. And I totally disagree with it.
This last topic is about modern and contemporary photography. I'd just like to ask you, what has been your experience with this type of materials? Like, I don't know, not only chromogenic from the last year of the 20th century, but digital prints. Have you been asked to treat
until the last few years, quite frankly, I've been fortunate enough not to have to deal with chromogenic prints. I usually declined to do anything with it. Because they can, I think that they're very difficult to deal with, and I think that your options are so limited that most of the time, in my opinion, there isn't a lot you can do. That's hugely interventive, although I gave a paper in Denver about a major treatment that I ended up in that wasn't supposed to go that way. And I did get out of it alive. I don't recommend it. I still try to avoid working on chromogenic prints because I still think that they're a total pain to deal with. As far as digital images go, I have yet to have to deal with one. I probably, if it's anything that's really severely catastrophic, I would probably encourage the owner to try to find a replacement, whether it's through having a new one printed, if the file still exists, or just find a replacement. It depends. I just haven't had to deal with it yet. I hope I don't have to deal with it. And I think that's something that the field hasn't really looked at itself yet. And we're running into things like face mounting. The main thing we know, the main thing we know about face mounting is that if it's not done absolutely perfectly, it develops problems and starts to undo itself. And there are a few people around who have dealt with that. I've had a few phone calls, but I've never had one come in. And so I've been very fortunate that way so far.
So the field still remains to know.
That's a whole arena that's yet to rise.
Thank you, Tom. And then I would like to come to the final topic, which is treatment experience and training. And many people consider that treatment proficiency is central to the competencies of a photograph conservator. I just would like to know if you agree with this statement. What is your opinion about it?
Well, assuming that you know all of the other things, that you know all of the other textbook stuff. Okay, we'll start from that point. Yes, I think that I think that actual treatment competence is absolutely essential, and it's very frustrating for me to know that there are very key people in the field of photograph conservation who have never done any extensive treatment at all, and yet they put themselves in a position of proclaiming what should or should not be done. And it's quite a parade.
Central time. People are.
I know, they know something's going on and they don't care, But I personally believe that if you haven't mastered a treatment, you're in no position to pass judgment on whether or not it should ever be done. And I would be much happier if people would be much more forthcoming and instead of saying that certain types of treatments shouldn't be done, and just say, I don't do that. I don't want to do it. I don't know how to do it. It doesn't matter, But to downplay treatments that can actually save images and make them stand on their own again, I think is unforgivable, and I think it's counter to what the field of conservation is about. Preventive conservation is a major issue, but there are thousands, if not millions, of photographs out there that need conservation treatment, and there need to be people who can do it.
And how do you think we gain treatment proficiency?
Well, it's going to become pretty difficult for younger people because those of us who are senior in the field, there aren't that many of us, and our numbers are going to start declining. And I think that young conservators coming into the field need to find internships and work with senior conservators who are willing to work with them. I take in third-year interns from the programs, and when they leave Q Edmondson Conservation Services, LLC, at the end of the year, they know how to do treatments. And then it's up to them to keep on. And you develop your competence by doing those treatments and honing your skills. And it only happens by doing it. And I can't give you my 30 years of experience, but I can give you enough that you can get 30 years of experience. And I can tell you how to think, and I can train you how to do. But then at a certain point, then you have to go on and do that, and you have to take the information and make it your own. And that's the way it should be. And I'm trying to pass on what I know how to do and what I know. And I expect the people who lead me to go on and take those skills and make them their own.
My last question, Tom, would be in terms of treatment, what do you think are the major challenges that the field faces?
Well, obviously, contemporary materials, we don't know enough about them yet. The other real major issue that I see is that many of us in the private sector don't have, I don't believe, we don't have the say that I think that we should have in terms of what's being taught and how it's being taught, or whether or not it is taught. And I personally think that if those of us who are senior in the field cannot play a bigger role in the preparation of young people, the field of conservation of photographs could get set back 2 or 3 generations in a plan. And I think that what's sad is that the few scientists that we had working in the field of photograph conservation have turned their attention to electronic media and the scientific research into treatments of traditional photographic materials just isn't being done. And so those of us who are still working are just trying to figure it out ourselves, and that's not very efficient. And I think it's really unfortunate.
What do you think we could make to change this situation? What do you think?
Well, I think that there's been a psychological change has taken place with the advent of electronic media and digital imaging, and there's just a tendency to act as if, that the old problems just don't exist anymore, and everybody's focusing their attention on all the new stuff, and that's, we do have to pay attention to that, but not at the expense of traditional photography. And I don't know how to change that. I bitch, and I tell people, there are issues there that, okay, you don't want me to do a borohydride treatment on a photograph, then give me a chemical treatment that will solve these problems. That's okay. Don't complain. In the meantime, we're going to work with the materials that we have, and we don't have people willing to do the science because there's no money in it, and the money is, there's no money to pay for it, is what I mean. And so people are going where there's money to pay for things, and I think it's, I just don't feel that, I don't feel that the right people are in a position to have a say. And until that changes, nothing else will change.
Thank you, Tom. Is there anything you would like to add to this interview?
No, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tom,
Alejandra,
for
asking for this interview, and I've enjoyed it, and I hope I've answered your questions to your satisfaction.
Thank you, Tom.